Tonight will be sort of the last formal session in the traditional lecture format, and our speaker is Dr. Anurag Danda, who works for the World Wildlife Fund, and he will talk about the environmental impact of India's development, and he'll tell it through the story of the Royal Bengal tiger. And just to put the session in perspective, I think it's kind of ironic that next week the Copenhagen meeting will take place of the world leaders to talk about what to do about climate change. It's also ironic that last week President Obama had his first state dinner, and it happened to be for the Prime Minister of India. So talking about India and environment is what will sort of be described in tonight's presentation. From our point of view, the coordinator's point of view, we also want to kind of remind you that our very first speaker, Ed Luce, who came and spoke on India's development, also connected India's development to the environment, and he had argued that world leaders cannot request India and countries like India, such as China, who are living, or the majority of the people today, Anurag said 80% of India's population does not have electricity. Forget consuming lots of electricity. 80% do not even have electricity. That's very difficult to tell countries like India to cut back on their consumption when they don't consume very much per capita. However, Ed Luce had also said that the climate change was making a difference in the lives of everyday Indians. He talked about how the rivers were kind of drying up and water was becoming a big issue. If I think about it, when we put together this colloquium almost 18 months ago, tonight's lecture is sort of very, I'm not sure what the right word is, but coincidentally very significant in terms of its timing and in terms of its topic. Before I introduce Anurag, I also want to, because this is the last time we are going to be using this room, thank the three technical support people who have been very, very helpful in taking care of all these little logistics. Stephanie Batters, Armand Lafave, and Matt Edges. I know from time to time we've had issues like the sound volume was too high or too low and things like that, but as you know, it does take a lot of effort to put these little details together, so the three coordinators are very grateful to you for all the help that you provided. To very briefly introduce Anurag Danda, he came from Calcutta, India. He works for the World Wildlife Fund. He has been educated as a sociologist. He has a PhD in sustainable development from the Netherlands. And he lives in that part of India where the big city is Calcutta or Kolkata. But he works in the Sundarban region, which is the delta region where the river Ganges and the river Brahmaputra flows into the Bay of Bengal. And it's sort of a lot of, the technical word I guess is mangroves, but a lot of marshlands and wetlands. And he is right there at the ground level working with people. So, unlike us professors who only theorize about it, he is right there at the front line dealing with the impact of the environment, both in terms of what nature is doing to people and what people is doing to nature. And we are very, very pleased that Anurag is able to tell us what the impact of India's development is on the environment. So please welcome Dr. Anurag Danda.
Good evening. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here and speaking to you all. And I thank the coordinators of the colloquium to invite me here. As Ruby's already introduced me, I work for the WWF in India. For a region called the Sundarbans. I also work for the coastal part of India, essentially trying to build climate resilience amongst the people of coastal India. Coastal India is fairly large, spanning thousands of kilometers. And as Ruby's already said, impacts of climate change in places along the coast in India are pretty visible. In some places, it's quite a negative impact on the life of the people, on the infrastructure that exists along the coast. And in some places, it's a little bit positive. For example, people along the southeastern coast, the fishermen who had never seen oil sardines in their lives, because of increased temperature in the Bay of Bengal, there is a lot of oil sardine to be harvested, which is good for the fishermen. But what it does to the coastal ecosystem is yet uncertain. Tonight I will speak essentially of the Sundarbans, which is the largest mangrove patch intact anywhere in the world. It's not a very usual place to be working in. In conventional terms, it's not a very easy place to be working in. But for me, this is not a job that I do. It's just that I get paid for what I do, and that's a bonus. WWF as an employer is absolutely fantastic. Anywhere in the world, be it here in the US or in India, it allows its employees to do their own thing, so long it addresses the overall mission of why WWF exists and what it would like to achieve. Coming back to Sundarbans, as I said, this is the largest mangrove patch anywhere in the world. Historically, it used to be pretty large. The red patch that you see on the map is the city of Kolkata, or Calcutta it used to be called. This is a map from 1875. The British colonial administration opened up this area for land revenue and for timber. And by the time they left the Indian subcontinent, it was reduced to 10,000 square kilometers. You will have to pardon me for using the metric system because that's what I'm used to. But I will also try and put it into acres. What we are left with is 247,000 acres of contiguous mangrove patch, partly in India, in West Bengal, and partly in East Pakistan, which was East Pakistan and now Bangladesh. This is also an area, despite being very poorly developed in terms of infrastructure, in terms of delivery of services like healthcare, education, energy services, has a population density of 1,000 people per square kilometer. That's about 1,000 people every 247 acres, which by Indian standards is also very high. The average rural population density in India is less than 350 per square kilometer. The reason why so many people, despite the lack of conventional development, continue to live here is because this is an extremely well-endowed ecosystem in terms of flora and fauna, on land and in water. And this is also the only wetland tiger habitat anywhere in the world. This is not a conventional tiger habitat. This is also not a conventional human habitat. On the Indian side of Sundarbans, there are 102 small deltaic islands. 54 of these have human habitation. The rest are forested and are provided various degrees of protection by law and through enforcement. Unfortunately, this is also an area where the negative impacts of climate change are quite visible. On the map, you see an island being encircled. This island used to be called Lohachara. The image which is circled here behind me is from 1973. In 1990, it was less than quarter its size. By 2001, it was gone. Many scientists attributed this loss to the active delta processes, where land is eroded and elsewhere land is being built again. Something should have cropped up here by that process. It hasn't happened. And probably the people of Lohachara
the river
are the first
Ganga
climate
meets
refugees.
the Bay of Bengal in a maze of rivulets and islands, forming the world's largest mangrove delta. This is the Sundarbans. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984, the southernmost borders of India and Bangladesh run along this region. Its ecological fragility and the dangers it faces today are a matter of mounting concern. Already, 19,000 acres of forest land has been submerged. 4 islands have been submerged in 30 years by rising waters. Salinity has increased dramatically in rivers and aquifers. Experts believe there is enough scientific evidence to link this to climate change. In addition to the Royal Bengal tiger, the Sundarbans has an extraordinary wealth of flora and fauna. The wild boar, the barking and spotted deer, 226 species of birds, and over 20 species of snakes have their natural habitat here. All are threatened, along with the Sundari tree itself, by increased salinity and rising sea levels. The future of many islands in the Sundarbans is uncertain. The 4 islands of Kapashkori, Bedford, Supari Bhanga and Lohachara are already submerged. Smaller islands like Bhangadwari and Ghoramara are losing 20 hectares of land every year. For the larger Sagar Island, this figure is 45 hectares. The changes that we are seeing here should give the state's policymakers strong reasons for concern. These changes have also given rise to a new human phenomenon, the emergence of the ecological refugee. As more and more people lose their lands and livelihoods, they are voting with their feet and moving towards cities such as Kolkata, adding to the already intense urban pressures there.
from that small clip, I'm sure you would realize it's not very pleasant an experience most of the times working in the Sundarbans. Simply because there is so much of despair, simply because there is so much at loss, be it in terms of human suffering, be it in terms of changes in the ecosystem, much of which we do not understand. Yet, we continue to work. We can't throw up our hands and say this is a lost case, simply because we think this is an area, even though if it is lost eventually, has a lot of lessons for the rest of us in the different parts of the world. And if we can get some of our things right here in the Sundarbans, sufferings and losses elsewhere in the world could be much less. On behalf and for WWF, the kind of work that we do is the overarching goal is to promote sustainable development in the area, despite the fact that infrastructure is poorly developed, service delivery is rather poor. And so we do a wide range of activities, engaging with communities, engaging with different levels of the government, trying to demonstrate small projects to show that certain things work, certain things don't work, and therefore there are lessons to take as to why it doesn't work. We are also trying to keep the people away as far as possible from venturing into the tiger habitat because it results in human-wildlife conflict. Official records maintained by the government of West Bengal show at least 2.5 dozen human deaths attributed to tiger. Most of this happens when humans venture into the forest. There are also incidences where the tiger comes into the villages because there are watercourses that separate human habitation in the forest, and in some places these are extremely narrow watercourses and tidal at that. During low tide, there is hardly any water in these watercourses. Here in this clip, we on behalf of the WWF are trying to help a community build a water filter system which uses harvested rainwater, because for the Sundarbans the only source is the groundwater, which is turning increasingly brackish. This is also the place where Ruby and Nikhilesh had visited and we met for the first time. This is something quite low tech. The people practically built it themselves. And this May, we were visited by a cyclone, which you would call here a hurricane. And of course, this system was also put out of gear. But because the people had built it themselves, the turnaround time for this particular facility was the shortest among all of the drinking water facilities. And therefore, this is one example where we have learned that in all the places where drinking water is going to be an issue because of climate change, a model like this might work, but there would still be copious amount of rainfall. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the tiger and its fate in the trajectory of India's development. Unfortunately, it does not make for a very And there are various reasons for it. But the tiger is important for the simple reason that it's like the coal miner's cannery. If the cannery died, the miner knew it was time to retreat. And therefore, we need to be extremely mindful of what is happening to the tiger. Because if we are able to save the tiger, it is not only the tiger, it's the habitat and other forms of wildlife that also occupy the habitat. In October this year, experts from all the tiger range countries and officials from these countries came together in a conference in Nepal in Kathmandu and put a very big question mark on the existence of the tiger in the wild over the next 15-20 years. And they concluded that if conservation proceeded as business as usual, the tiger didn't have more than 20 years, even in its stronghold in India. Now, what happened to the tiger population? Towards the beginning of the 20th century, the estimates are that we had 100,000 tigers in the wild. But we started losing them pretty rapidly. And today, that figure, for the global figure, is 3,500 tigers. In a 50-year period between 1940 and 1990, we lost the tigers in the wild in 4 different places, in Bali, in southern China, in Central Asia, and in Java. Fortunately for the tiger, there is a ban in China, a domestic ban, in trading in tiger parts. Had this ban not been in place, probably the rest of the tigers that we see today in the wild would also come to death. And so today the tiger is the tiger population is at a tipping point. If it goes any beyond this, it's almost like a lost case. The lighter color on the map that you see behind me is the historical tiger range, and the green patches show the current occupancy of the tigers, which is just about 7% of what it used to be. At WWF, we are hopeful that if we are able to increase this green patches to 12% of the historic range and are able to provide adequate protection, the tigers' numbers will double in the next 10 years. Because tigers are like cats, they're prolific breeders. But we need to get our acts right to not only get those patches increased to at least 12% of the historic range, but also to secure those patches. If the numbers that you see are the rough estimates, in India that's roughly about 1,400. Now with better estimation methods, we know it's close to 1,300 rather than 1,400. Now what has happened, at least in this stronghold that is India for the tiger over the period? A number of things have happened. Probably something like this has also happened. This is a photograph of a man taken in 1948 who was the Maharaja of Sarguja. When India became independent, there were 500 odd principalities all over India. These were all small-time Maharajas. Under a shooting spree, this man alone killed 1,360 tigers. In this photograph of 1948, he's probably posing with the last 3 wild cheetahs in the world in India. So there were people like him behaving in a certain manner, probably because of this. This is an image from 1903 where a colonial officer is posing with the trophy and his wife. So a small-time Maharaja was probably aping the colonial officer. And the colonial officer in turn was aping probably the emperor. Because game hunting was nothing new in the subcontinent of India. But because of the elaborateness and the expenses involved in game hunting in those times, not many people could indulge in it until the advent of the gun. Even in this painting, where you can see guns and Europeans, you still needed 5 elephants, 10 people to corner one tiger to shoot it down. So even after the advent of the gun, it wasn't exactly cheap to kill tigers. Till the time the guns kept improving and success rate of tiger killings kept going up and up. Apart from all of this game hunting, a lot of other things also happened during colonial administration. To give you one example, is the advent of the railway in India. On the top right corner is the image, the grainy image of the first railway line in India, which became operational in 1853, and it only ran for 22 miles from Bombay to a place called Thane. But this was in 1853. And in less than 100 years, when the British left India in 1947, they had already laid 55,000 kilometers of railway track in India. That's roughly about 35,000 miles. And each of these 35,000 miles needed 3,000 of these planks that you see across the railway tracks. And these tracks and these railway planks, called the sleepers, were quite voluminous, as you can see in the top right corner. And to cater to this demand, 20 million hectares of forest were lost. The extent of this infrastructure development during the colonial period can be guessed from the fact that since the British left, and it is 62 years now in India, we have only added another 9,000 kilometers of railways in India. So on this count, we blame for the loss of the forest, loss of tiger, and pretty squarely we laid at the door of the British. But when the British left, they also left behind a country of 300 million people. They left behind a country of 550,000 villages. Of these 550,000 villages, in 1947, only 1,500 villages were electrified. The rest did not have electricity. This is the image of our first Prime Minister Nehru, who was charged with this daunting task of managing a country of 300 million, 83% of whom were illiterate, couldn't read or write at all. The GDP was only $3.5 billion. Life expectancy was only about 32 years. Food grain production was at 51 million tons. And Nehru was a great believer in modern technology, in addressing all of these problems, and therefore commissioned building of dams, irrigation channels, power stations. A lot of mining activity started around that time. All of these activities not only took a toll on the forests and on the wildlife in India, it also displaced 60 million people internally. And therefore, we were only left with 41 million hectares of forest by the end of Nehru's tenure. Shortly after his death, his daughter, Indira Gandhi, became the Prime Minister of India. Despite all the investments that were initiated during her father's tenure as Prime Minister, the population kept rising. It was almost double when she became Prime Minister. The food grain production hadn't doubled. Although the land area was marginally up, which was used for cultivation. It was up by about 24 million hectares, of which only about 20% came under irrigation. You can see from the bar graphs, the yellow ones are the area under cultivation. The green ones depict the food grain being produced, and the tiny ones are the percentage of land being irrigated. Obviously, this wasn't keeping pace with the population growth in India. And this image of Mrs. Gandhi here in Washington, she had come here to ask for food grain, which at the time the United States very generously donated to India. And India was able to avert a potential food crisis and famine. Despite all this, the economy in the nation continued to grow. Initially, it was at a very slow pace, which many a times the economists have called the Hindu growth rate. At that time, the economy was growing only at about 3%. Today, despite the collapse of the financial systems globally, the Indian economy continues to grow, not at the rate it was growing 2 years back. It's still growing. And till last year, it was about 1.2 trillion, starting from about 3.5 billion in 1947. Mrs. Gandhi was also important from the point of view of tiger conservation in the country. She realized what was happening to the tiger with habitat because of all the expansion in the economy, because of expansion of the human population. She could visualize an image like this where the forest kept shrinking and the population kept rising. And so she became a one-person crusader for tiger conservation in India. And by 1973, she had set up tiger reserves in the country. We started with 9 tiger reserves for the protection of tiger, for the protection of the habitat, and for the protection of other wildlife that occupy that habitat along with the tiger. But as such, there was no environmental consciousness in the country till the time this man on the right, to your left, called Anil Agarwal, came into the picture. Anil Agarwal in 1982 set up a society called the Center for Science and Environment and published the first citizens' report on the state of India's environment in 1982. Around the same time, the other man at the bottom corner of the frame, called M.C. Mehta, became a Supreme Court lawyer in Delhi. He's from the province of Jammu and Kashmir. In 1984, he took up environmental litigation. And these two people, Anil Agarwal and M.C. Mehta, became responsible almost single-handedly or double-handedly in case of the people to instill environmental consciousness in the country. And by 1992, this journal called Down to Earth was published for the first time. And today it is a very well-established journal, very well respected, and is in a position to influence the government of India and other state governments in India. With the rise in this consciousness, the demand for conservation also kept rising. By then, WWF had also become a little stronger in India with support from Mrs. Gandhi. This November, we have completed 40 years in India. And as a result, starting from 9 tiger reserves in 1973, today we have about 30, covering 1% of the total land area in India. But unfortunately, the figures, the tiger numbers that we had started with in 1973, which was about 1,400, are back to around the same figure, despite all the effort, all the consciousness. Now, this may not be solely due to loss of tigers. This could also be attributed to the different methodology of tiger estimation during that time and the current methodology to estimate tiger numbers. The earlier methods scientists have rejected as being erroneous, as being overestimation. So probably we didn't start with the figure of 1,400 or 1,800 in 1973, and probably it was much less. And as you can see on this map, a lot of this tiger habitat is in central India, edging towards the east. A lot of the industrial activity which is resulting in the boom in the Indian economy is also happening around the same area. A lot of mining activity, a lot of road building activity, new industries, steel plants. These are all coming around in central India, which is increasingly fragmenting the tiger habitat and making it difficult for the tiger to maintain a healthy population. A couple of months back, one of these parks in central India had to be repopulated with tigers being brought from another park, because the corridor between these two parks have been lost to all the development activity that is taking place. Very famously, 2 years back, it was realized that a tiger park in Rajasthan did not have a single tiger, despite claiming at least 30 in that park. This has also to do with tiger politics in India. The way the tiger parks are funded depends on the number of tigers that they can claim. And therefore, the higher the number, the greater was the federal funding that came to the park. And therefore, the park managers were only glad to inflate the numbers. Now, with stricter and more scientific methodology, that bluff is being blown away, and therefore the numbers are drastically coming down. Coming back to the Sundarbans, despite the fact that this is not a usual tiger habitat, this is probably the last refuge for the tiger. One, because, as I said, this is so poorly developed. There is no reflection here of the booming Indian economy, despite the fact that it is only about 100 odd kilometers, about 60-70 miles from the city of Calcutta. It is still extremely remote, poorly connected, and kind of a back of the beyond place. And therefore, across India and Bangladesh, if tiger conservationists, if the governments can get their acts together, the tiger still has hope here. The reason why I'm hopeful about the Sundarbans, despite the fact that this is not a usual tiger territory, is that one, poaching is also difficult and therefore much lower than in other parts of India. And two, because the population is used to so many other pressures, a tiger straying into the villages, killing half a dozen or 2 dozen people in the villages, killing their cattle, does not make them retaliate against the tiger, which is not the case in other tiger territories in India. In the Sundarbans, the government people, the conservation people like me, can be very proud in saying that in the last 10 years, not a single tiger has died in the villages in the retaliation. But straying in the Sundarbans is fairly common. There are 2 straying incidences every month on an average. Yet, this is what you get to see. This is a tiger which had strayed into the village and is about to go back home. This is a fairly common sight in the Sundarbans. And if we can get it right, I am sure my daughters and their daughters will continue to see sights like this. And therefore, I am hopeful of the tiger's future, at least in the Sundarbans. Thank you.
Before we open up the floor for questions, our colloquium students would like to thank Anurag.
On behalf of the Honors Colloquium, we'd just like to say thank you to Dr. Danda for present this gift.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor, absolutely an honor.
Also, since this is the last time we're going to be in Chafee, we wanted to say thank you to Professor Nick and Ruby Dulakia, as well as Professor Aaron Shukla, because they've done a great job. So just give them a hand, please, and thank you very much.
Okay, Anurag is open to answer any questions you would like about the tiger or India's development activities. The 2 microphones or 1 microphone? No, both microphones are here.
Is India working well with Bangladesh in this particular issue?
Sir, unfortunately, no. There is hardly any cooperation between India and Bangladesh on not only this issue, on none of the issues. And I think it has to do with the insecurity Bangladesh faces because of the sheer size of India and also being encircled by India on 3 sides. And for the state of West Bengal, which has a common border with Bangladesh, it is West Bengal is not the sovereign state. It has to go through the federal government, and therefore West Bengal and the Sundarbans are not always a priority for the rest of India. Unfortunately for us, we also do not have anything called WWF Bangladesh, and therefore I am handicapped and do not have the mandate to work with Bangladesh. I've been trying to speak to multilateral and supranational organizations to build this bridge, and tomorrow I'm going to be speaking at the World Bank, trying to sell this idea that if agencies like the UNDP, UNEP, and the World Bank and the ADB came together and floated a platform where people from India and Bangladesh could come together to begin with and share experiences and see the practices that are beneficial for both to follow, there might be a little better chance.
Yesterday in the New York Times there was an article on Indonesia, its place in the world being third in emissions of CO2, and not so much from industry but from the swamps at the mouth of their rivers that have been forested but deforested now, and all of the 50 feet of peat is drying up without the roots of the forest holding it and absorbing the water, and all of that carbon dioxide that was stored in the ground now is being emitted, putting them, ahead of Brazil in terms of emissions. Do you see that happening, and would there be interest? Is there a forest interest? I know there's some poachers that go after wood, but are there any industries that have said, let's go in and cut the forest down, or is it just too small in a mangrove forest? What is the interest in wood, and how are the tigers protecting that? I've heard they killed poachers.
Yes, they do.
Good justice, but and so they're protecting sort of this sink of CO2 as well as the ecosystem that could increase the speed of islands being drowned. So, what's the sense of the forest?
On two counts, Sundarbans has little more hope than the Indonesian forests. One is the best case scenario emerging out of Copenhagen coming next week is that there would be an agreement on REDD, that's on avoiding deforestation, and therefore putting incentives in place to keep forests standing rather than deforesting them. Indonesia has had a very big problem of deforestation, converting those lands into palm plantations, and also letting them lie, as you say, in those peat bogs, and therefore releasing a lot of carbon. Fortunately, in India, the Supreme Court, because of people like MC Mehta, have also been quite proactive. And in India, there is a complete ban on felling of mangrove anywhere, be it in the park, be it outside the park, anywhere. And therefore, there is a lot of protection. You cannot trade in that road, except for your own domestic use. There is no way you are going to be able to use mangrove. And in any case, the timber quality of mangrove was lost to the railways a century ago. So whatever is left is likely to be around.
How did you get a job in WWF?
As I said, this is not a job. I mean, it's just that I get paid for... I was doing this in any case, even before I joined WWF. I've been in the Sundarbans for 13 years. And I was fortunate. WWF found me out, rather than I looking up WWF. Because I'm not a biologist. I'm not a conservationist by training. And therefore, WWF was not amongst one of my prospective employers. As I was finishing my PhD, they somehow located me and said, come back, there's a job waiting for you here in India. And when I did look up the profile, I realized, yes, they did not have another candidate. This was a tailor-made job for me. And it's been an extended honeymoon since then.
Hi, do you ever see the possibility of an overpopulation of tigers? And if so, what would be the implications?
In Sundarbans, there might be a case where overpopulation might become a problem at one point of time. But in other parts of India, no, it's already underpopulation to quite an extent, and therefore no fear of overpopulation. In Sundarbans, the tigers are pretty well adapted to the ecosystem. Probably they are Bengali tigers and therefore are fish eaters, unlike tigers elsewhere in the world, in the wild. 20% of their diet comes from the aquatic resources. They are fish, crabs. Recently we found out even snakes, venomous snakes at that. Water monitor lizards. For the tigers elsewhere, there is places to go. I mean, the landscapes are much larger. But in Sundarbans, if for some reason tigers were to breed in a very prolific manner, there isn't a lot of space because each tiger needs about 40 to 45 square kilometers area, which is the tiger territory. And earlier there was a belief that Sundarbans tiger were not territorial. But recent research has shown they're as territorial as other tigers elsewhere, maybe in central India, Java or wherever. And therefore, yes, it would lead to a space crunch at some point of time if there were far too many tigers. But then these tigers could be taken elsewhere to repopulate landscapes. We're not only able to protect a large area of land and water, and all those other species and creatures that inhabit that piece of land and water. Very frankly, ecologically, the tiger were to disappear, nothing would happen to the Sundarbans.
Did you say the tiger was likable?
Yes,
Okay.
very much.
So, I had two questions then. Who was the brave person who took that footage that you showed at the end of your talk? And what could sustainable development possibly mean in a place where the population is 1,000 persons per square mile?
To the question, to answer your first question, it's a footage from one of my colleagues. He happened to be there when the tiger was being released. And for us, this is quite a common happening. I've never get an opportunity to see one of these incidents, nor do I get to photograph any of these incidents. My colleagues who are based in the field, who happen to react in a matter of a couple of hours, they are the more fortunate ones. And coming back to your second question of what sustainable development would mean for a place like this and for a human population like this, there are two things. One is to keep helping the population that is mature, which is an adult population, to help them continue to make a living within the Sundarbans without over-exploiting the ecosystem. One of the initiatives that we have undertaken is reintroduction of salt-tolerant crops, essentially paddy, the rice crop, which is the staple for that part of the country. For the younger generation, the idea is to invest in them now in ever-increasing amounts, so that in a generation or two, they are able to come here and speak to you and not become migrants in large cities like Calcutta and Danda. And for the population that will have to be helped to continue to make a living, the path that the rest of India has followed is not the path for them. Immediately after I go back from here, we will get ourselves busy in establishing a solar power station for a particular hamlet seen. The idea is not only to provide access to electricity, but also to provide access through non-carbon sources. And therefore, if it is a solar power station, which does not depend on fossil fuel, would not only be replacing fossil fuel that they consume now for lighting, would also possibly, if in enough numbers of solar power stations or other renewables that can be used in a region like the Sundarbans, could possibly earn enough carbon credits to sustain itself financially. So the idea is the economy expands in the area, but the expansion is not at the cost of the environment, not at the cost of emitting more carbon from these areas. So this is a two-track approach that we think will work for places like this. So are we done?
I was wondering if you would share again the example of the kind of social change that you have to take into account in order to influence the lives of the people. The water system that you built and the other hamlet that resisted it. If you would use those two examples to indicate the kind of challenges you face in trying to make a difference.
The challenges are quite a few. Some of them are natural, some of them are social, some of them are our own making. There are times when we are over-ambitious, greedy, so to say, that we can really make a difference, a positive difference. And the example that Ruby was mentioning was the small video clip that I showed, where people were building themselves a water facility. This hamlet was deficient in water because the island as such on which this hamlet is located, the groundwater is brackish and therefore had to fetch fresh water from another island. They were spending about 3.5 hours one way in fetching this water. So this hamlet readily agreed and did demand a water facility from us when we volunteered to work with them. And when they eventually did build it themselves, we were very encouraged and said, oh, this is a thing that works. We should take it to the government, we should take it to the other hamlets. The very next hamlet on the same island with the same problem said, no, we don't want a facility like this. And one of my colleagues who lives in that village one day called me out of desperation, saying, you have to come and visit these women here. They are accusing me of trying to steal their time. And so obviously he was at his wit's end, saying we are the do-gooders here. And on the rebound, we are being accused of trying to steal time from him, who practically have nothing much to offer. So when I got into a dialogue with these women, because women are the ones who collect water in these societies, the women literally said, get lost. We don't want you, we don't want your water facility, we are doing just fine. I said, how come? I mean, we are trying to be helpful. They said, no, you don't realize. We're not trying to be nice. You're going to spoil us. You're going to take away our time, whatever little time that we have. So I said, no, if you have this water facility, like the women in that other hamlet, will only be spending 15 to 20 minutes to fetch water. And they said, yes, that's the problem. We need those 3.5 hours because that is the only time that we have to be with our friends, with our relatives, with whom we want to be. When we are at home, it is the men, it is the children, it is the in-laws who all have a share on that time. And therefore, get lost. We don't want. And that's what they articulated as trying to steal away our time. So this example has taught us a lot, that a similar situation or a stimuli, if you want to call it, creates different responses in two very close by hamlets. And therefore, when we deal with societies, now we've taken it as a lesson never to assume that the societies would respond to the same stimuli in a similar manner. These are human beings we are dealing with. Despite literacy, despite levels of poverty. And therefore, when I scale it up and look at 30 different states in groups like the Lions, except for when there are kids with the mother, they're in a group of 3. And if one of the younger tigers happen to be a male, then the mother is even more protective, because the father, out of fear of competition, would try and eliminate the male child. So they don't live in groups. Apart from humans as predators of tigers, in the Sundarbans, the estuarine crocodiles are a predator of the tiger. But again, this is not a usual tiger scenario. In most places, tigers are at the apex of the ecosystem. In the Sundarbans also, on the terrestrial part, they are, yes, very much at the apex. But they do get into conflicts with crocodiles, and where the crocodiles have an upper hand.
It's interesting to see what's happening with tigers, what's happening with and in this continent, we're hearing an awful lot that, we still need to develop these areas, we still need the oil, we still need the resources, and, some of the cynics will say, what's so important about polar bears? It seems analogous to what's happening with the tiger. I'm wondering what you say to people who, think that, so we lose a few hundred or a few thousand, top of the food chain animals in our ecosystem. What does that mean? What is the signal to us? You talked about the Miriam and mine. We're fascinated with the developments of the discussions in North America about polar bears. I'm sure it's very similar to this. I'd like to hear a simple explanation as to why you value the polar bear in our continent, the tiger in North America.
Ecologically speaking, Sundarbans would not miss the tiger.